The morning air was unusually still, like the world was holding its breath. I gripped my coffee cup tighter than usual, my knuckles white, and stared at the stack of divorce papers in front of me. I had walked into this lawyer's office 1,000 times in my head, rehearsing every possible scenario, every word I might need to say, but nothing could have prepared me for the way he walked in. He didn't look defeated or remorseful as I expected. No, he looked excited. His tailored suit was perfect, his hair immaculately styled, and that smug, arrogant smile that had once made my heart flutter now made my stomach twist in disgust. "Today's my best day," he announced, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "I'm taking everything from you." Everything. The word hung in the air like a guillotine. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of her, the mistress. She leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed, smirking like the villain in some twisted movie. Her eyes met mine for a second, and I saw it, pure triumph, the kind that chills you to your bones. I forced a calm smile. "Good morning," I said, voice steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. My lawyer, sitting to my side, leaned in and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Did you do exactly what I said?" "Good. The show starts now." My pulse quickened, not from fear, but anticipation. The lawyer and I had been planning this for months. Every move I was about to make had been meticulously calculated, and now the moment had come to execute it. Husband leaned casually on the edge of my desk, tapping his fingers as if counting his victories. "I hope you've prepared to hand it all over," he said, eyes glinting with arrogance. "Every account, every property, every asset. It's mine." I nodded slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch just a fraction too long. I saw his confidence falter. Just slightly, but enough to know the first crack had appeared. The mistress stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor, exuding that same overconfident aura. "I can't wait to see the look on your face when she has nothing left," she said, her smirk widening. I met her gaze without blinking. "Oh, you will see a look," I said softly, almost to myself. But it wasn't fear. It was something sharper, controlled, precise, ready to strike. My lawyer gave me a subtle nod, and I knew it was time. Time to turn every smug word, every overconfident glance, every self-satisfied smirk against him. Husband continued, pacing now, hands behind his back. "You know, I've always thought you underestimated me. Today, I'll finally show you who's really in control." I leaned back, folding my arms, letting him do all the talking. Every boast, every threat, every condescending glance. He didn't realize he was digging his own trap. And the mistress? She still thought she was untouchable. Then my lawyer stood, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "Let's start," he said, voice low, but carrying an authority that made the room tighten around us like a vice. Husband's smirk faltered, just a fraction, but he quickly recovered. "What do you mean, start?" he asked, a hint of unease creeping into his tone. "The papers," my lawyer said, pointing to the divorce documents. "Everything you think you're taking, you'll soon realize is not so simple." Husband laughed, a short, sharp bark of overconfidence. "Do you really think I don't know the law? Every clause, every loophole, it's all in my favor." I watched him, letting him talk, letting him believe. The mistress leaned in closer, whispering something I didn't catch, her grin unwavering. But in that moment, I felt calm, almost serene. I had spent months planning every detail, studying every angle, and now the chessboard was set. The lawyer's eyes met mine again, a silent signal passing between us. "Now," he said, and in that simple word, I felt the power shift. The moment of reckoning was here. I smiled, finally letting my first hint of emotion show. Not fear, not anger, but a quiet, dangerous confidence. "Let's begin," I said, and the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first move. The divorce, which he had expected to be a victory parade, was about to become his nightmare. The days leading up to that fateful morning had been a blur of strategy, careful observation, and quiet determination. While he lounged at fancy dinners, flaunted his new car, and whispered sweet nothings to her, I was quietly building my fortress, one legal document, one hidden account, one carefully timed move at a time. No one outside my lawyer's office knew the real plan. Not him, not the mistress, not a single friend or relative. I had become an expert at wearing masks, pretending to be overwhelmed, weak, or distracted, all while quietly lining up every piece of evidence that would turn the entire divorce on its head. The lawyer's office had become our war room. Files, spreadsheets, and legal documents were spread across the polished oak table. Each folder represented a different layer of the plan: hidden bank accounts, financial investments, property deeds, and digital evidence of mismanagement on his part. "Everything you thought you could take?" my lawyer asked, his eyes sharp, calculating. "It's protected. Every asset, every penny." I nodded, running a finger across a file labeled offshore accounts and hidden investments. Months ago, he had underestimated me, thinking I was naive about finances, about the law, about life outside of his control. That arrogance had become my greatest weapon. I remembered the night I had discovered his most audacious financial secret. He had bragged to a friend about a hidden account overseas, thinking I would never find out. But I acted quickly, moving my assets to secure accounts, creating airtight contracts, and ensuring that no maneuver he made could reach them. Every step had been planned, every contingency accounted for. "Remember," my lawyer said, lowering his voice, "the key is timing. We wait for him to make his move. Confidence will be his downfall." I took a deep breath. Confidence. That had always been his hallmark. His smug grin. The way he believed he could manipulate the world. Manipulate me. But he had never considered that patience. Patience combined with intelligence could outmatch arrogance. Late nights were spent reviewing every detail, running simulations of how he might react to each legal maneuver. We even practiced conversations, how he might intimidate, how she might smirk, and how I would remain unshaken. Each scenario ended with the same outcome: him losing control, me gaining the upper hand. I remembered the moment it all clicked. A simple idea, a single clause in a contract he never noticed, which would legally block him from claiming anything from certain assets. I had felt a thrill then, quiet but intense, like a spark before a storm. That small victory gave me confidence. If I could orchestrate that, I could orchestrate everything. "Do you ever get scared?" the lawyer asked one evening, sipping his coffee. I paused. Scared? Of him? Of her? Of the court? "No," I said. "Not scared, determined." That determination carried me through the most exhausting weeks. Late nights, endless calculations, careful tracking of every transaction he made, every document he signed, every whisper in the shadows of his empire. I learned everything about him without his knowledge. Meanwhile, he paraded around thinking he had the game in his hands. He didn't notice that the chessboard had changed. Every pawn, every rook, every knight had been moved in secret. And the queen, the most powerful piece, was me. By the time the divorce papers were ready, I had a strategy so airtight that no one, not even his cleverest lawyer, could find a loophole. Every claim he thought he could make had been countered, legally and strategically. And yet the genius of the plan lay in subtlety. I couldn't let him sense it. Arrogance needed to be his undoing. Every smirk, every taunt, every overconfident step he took was part of the script. He would think he was in control. But the reality was, he was walking straight into a trap of his own making. I recalled my first meeting with the lawyer months ago. His words had echoed in my mind ever since. They always underestimate the one they think is weaker. Play the long game. Let them take the bait. And I had. The morning of the confrontation, every detail was perfect. His entrance, his words, her smirk, the tension in the air. They were all elements in a performance. I had meticulously choreographed. The show would begin, and the audience would be none other than the man who thought he had everything. The hidden preparations were done. The storm was ready to break. And soon, everything he had ever believed about power, control, and victory would crumble before his eyes. The courtroom, or rather, the lawyer's office transformed into a battlefield, had never felt so charged. Every tick of the clock echoed like a drumbeat of war. My husband, still radiant in his overconfidence, strutted in as if he owned not just the room, but the world itself. Behind him, his mistress followed, heels clicking against the polished floor with a rhythm that mocked my calm. He wasted no time. "You really think you can stand up to me?" he asked, voice low, menacing. "Do you even know what you're getting yourself into?" His smirk was meant to intimidate, to make me doubt myself, but it had the opposite effect. I leaned back in my chair, fingers lightly tapping the tabletop, the calm in me radiating an invisible force. Every overconfident glare, every calculated pause from him fed into my plan. The mistress, sensing victory, stepped closer, her perfume sharp in the air. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You're about to lose everything," she whispered, her eyes dancing with triumph. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had prepared for this. The power wasn't in shouting louder. It was in being untouchable, patient and strategic. My lawyer, ever the silent predator beside me, gave a subtle nod. That single gesture was enough to remind me that everything was on track. Husband's tactics escalated. He leaned over the table, his voice rising with faux anger. I've been generous. I've given you chances. But today, that generosity ends. Every asset, every account, every investment is mine. Do you hear me? I smiled just slightly, letting him think he was winning me over. I hear you, I said softly. My calmness unnerved him, though he masked it with forced confidence. He brought out documents, slapping them on the table with authority. Here's what I want, and there's nothing you can do about it. I glanced at each paper, nodding as if considering them, but inside I was analyzing, cross-checking, remembering every clause, every loophole we had exploited. I let the silence grow. Tension is a weapon, and I wielded it better than he knew. Mistress, thinking she had the upper hand, leaned back, smirking. See, I told you. She can't fight this. I looked at her directly, still silent, letting the weight of my gaze unsettle her. The room grew smaller, the air thicker. Her smirk faltered. I had never even touched my trump cards, and already she was sensing something she couldn't control. Husband's frustration mounted. Why aren't you panicking? He barked. Why are you just sitting there? Because panic is a language for the weak, I thought. My mind was calculating every outcome, predicting every move. Patience, I whispered to myself, is your sword. Confidence, your shield. He tried again, softer this time, trying to charm, to manipulate. You know you're better off agreeing, right? You don't want to look foolish in front of everyone. I let him speak, nodding, letting each word fill the room with tension. Every syllable he uttered, every attempt to intimidate, was a step closer to the trap we had set. My lawyer cleared his throat. Are we ready to proceed? He asked, voice calm, almost icy. Husband waved his hand dismissively, still convinced he had the upper hand. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. Even he could feel it, the faint shift in control, the realization that the plan might not be as simple as he thought. Mistress whispered again, trying to regain confidence. Just sign. Give him what he wants. It'll be over before you know it. I smiled faintly, the quiet confidence in me like a silent blade. He hadn't noticed it yet. But the first moves of his downfall were already in motion. He was too arrogant, too sure of himself. And arrogance, as I had learned, is a slow killer. By the time the first set of documents had been negotiated, he was sweating slightly. Not from effort, but from the tiny, subtle cracks forming in his control. His arrogance was beginning to falter, but he was blind to why. He thought it was a matter of timing, luck, or perhaps the mistress' influence, but in reality, it was the careful orchestration of months of preparation. And all the while, I remained calm, collected, untouchable. My patience was my weapon. Every smirk he threw, every threat he muttered, every attempt to dominate, it all fed into the momentum that was slowly but surely turning the tables. By the end of the day, he hadn't realized it yet, but the first waves of his nightmare had already begun. The courtroom, or our staged battlefield, was tense, almost suffocating in its silence. Husband sat across from me, still clinging to the illusion of control. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, his eyes darting nervously, though he tried to hide it. The mistress leaned forward again, ready to savor his victory, still smirking like she owned the world. But the world they thought they controlled was about to shatter. I shifted slightly in my chair, placing my hands over the neatly stacked documents in front of me. The first piece of the trap had been carefully prepared. A full account of every asset he thought he could seize, every hidden property, every secret investment, and crucially, the legal loopholes we had exploited to shield them from his grasp. I slid the first folder toward my lawyer. He gave me a subtle nod, and then, with calm authority, he addressed the room. Let's go over what's really yours, and what you thought was his. Husband's eyes flicked toward the papers, then back to me. What do you mean? He asked, voice tense. I leaned forward, letting a faint, confident smile touch my lips. Everything you assumed was yours isn't. Mistress blinked, her smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. She leaned in closer, suspicion creeping into her expression. My lawyer began presenting evidence systematically. Hidden accounts, offshore investments, properties cleverly registered in my name or legally protected trusts. Each revelation was subtle at first, but the pattern became undeniable. Husband's smirk turned to confusion, then to shock. How is this possible? He stammered, scanning the documents. I spoke, steady and clear. Because you underestimated me. Because you believed arrogance and intimidation would be enough. But I had help, and I was prepared. Mistress gasped, realizing for the first time that she was not just watching him lose. She was powerless to influence the outcome. You can't do this, he shouted, banging the table. These assets, they're mine. My lawyer raised a hand, calm but firm. Legally, no. Every move was executed within the law. Every loophole you relied on, closed. Husband's face twisted with anger and disbelief. His confident posture crumbled. Every overconfident word, every taunt he had thrown earlier, now hung against him like chains. Mistress looked like she wanted to speak, to argue, to scream. But the evidence spoke louder than words. Every paper, every clause, every legal safeguard was a wall he could not breach. I let them stew in it. Silence is a weapon, and I wielded it perfectly. Their realization of their defeat was slow, painful, and deliciously satisfying. He tried one last tactic: charm, manipulation, desperation. You're making a mistake. This isn't over, I smiled, calm and composed. It's exactly over. And I warned you, arrogance is dangerous. The mistress finally shifted uncomfortably, sensing the trap they had both fallen into. My lawyer added the final blow. The documents you relied on to claim control are invalidated. All assets are protected and untouchable. The divorce terms favor her. Legally. Husband's face went pale. Every plan he had meticulously crafted, every boast, every threat, every attempt to intimidate me, crumbled in the space of minutes. His dream of total victory had turned into a nightmare he could not escape. I leaned back, taking a slow breath. You thought today was your best day, I said softly, letting the words linger. But it was mine. Mistress, still shocked, could only sit silently, her smug aura gone. The man who had once tried to dominate me completely was now powerless, trapped by his own arrogance and my careful preparation. In that moment, I felt a quiet triumph. Not the loud, vengeful kind, but the satisfaction of seeing justice unfold, of watching years of manipulation and control collapse under the weight of intelligence, patience, and preparation. The first wave of the nightmare had begun, and it would only get worse for him as the proceedings continued. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the courtroom, but the warmth outside could not touch the cold electric tension inside. My husband sat across from me, trying to maintain an air of control, but his hands trembled slightly over the armrest. The mistress hovered behind him, frowning for the first time since this ordeal began. The lawyer leaned over, whispering just enough for me to hear. Stay calm. Let him make the first mistake. I nodded subtly, my heart steady. Months of preparation had led to this moment. Every document, every hidden account, every airtight clause, every piece of evidence. It was all here, ready to dismantle his arrogance completely. Husband started with a confident flourish, slapping another stack of papers onto the table. I've laid out everything clearly, he said, voice dripping with overconfidence. You'll see I'm entitled to every asset, every single one. The judge raised an eyebrow, silent but attentive. The courtroom was watching, sensing the tension. I took a slow, deliberate breath. Your Honor, I began, my voice calm, confident, and steady. Before we proceed, I believe it's important to clarify which assets are legally mine and which are protected, under proper trusts and contracts. Husband scoffed, leaning back. This is a joke. Everyone knows these assets are mine. She can't possibly. The lawyer cut him off, calm and precise. Actually, sir, every account he believes he can claim has been accounted for. Proper legal measures were taken months ago to ensure compliance with the law. Nothing is left to chance. The courtroom shifted. Murmurs rose as the legal implications began to sink in. Husband's smugness faltered. His eyes darted back and forth between the papers and me, trying to comprehend the reality he had ignored. I began revealing details one by one. Hidden offshore accounts carefully protected. Investments legally registered in my name and shielded from his claims. Property deeds that had been moved to trusts he couldn't touch. Digital evidence, showing financial mismanagement, and misleading declarations he had made to his previous lawyer. With each revelation, his composure cracked a little more. The smirk that had once been permanently plastered on his face was gone, replaced with confusion, disbelief, and finally, desperation. This "This can't be true," he muttered under his breath, the first sign of panic I had seen. The mistress, attempting to maintain her own superiority, whispered angrily, "This isn't possible. How did she—" I met her gaze, calm, collected. "Months of preparation," I said softly, letting the words sink like a knife. The judge leaned forward, reviewing the documentation. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of shuffling, papers, and the faint hum of the ventilation. Husband attempted a last-ditch tactic, raising his voice, trying to dominate the room with his presence. You can't take this from me. This is legally mine!" My lawyer, steady and unwavering, presented the final blow. "Everything has been done in accordance with the law. Any attempt to seize these assets without proper authorization would be null and void. Every move he thought he had under control has been legally countered." Husband's face turned pale. Every claim he had believed would secure his victory was crumbling before him. The mistress slumped, realizing fully that their arrogance had blinded them to the truth. I leaned back, letting the courtroom absorb the shift in power. Silence reigned for a moment, before murmurs of astonishment rose among the spectators. The arrogance and intimidation that had once ruled the room had been replaced with truth, justice, and preparation. And as I watched my husband struggle to regain control, I felt a quiet satisfaction, the calm before the next storm. The nightmare had begun, and there was no turning back. The first major victory was mine, but the final outcome was still unfolding. Every move he had made to dominate me was now a weapon I could wield against him, and he, for the first time, realized that the divorce he thought would be his triumph was turning into his complete undoing. The room felt colder now, not physically but emotionally, every ounce of control the mistress had thought she possessed was slipping through her fingers like sand. She had arrived that morning with that same overconfident smirk, heels clicking like a metronome of triumph. But with each revelation of hidden accounts, legal maneuvers, and airtight protections, her world had begun to crumble. She tried to recover, leaning forward with a forced smile. This isn't how it's supposed to happen," she whispered to my husband, voice shaking slightly. He barely looked at her. His own panic had overtaken him. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and his confident posture sagged. I don't understand. I had it all planned," he muttered, panic creeping into every word. I watched them carefully, my calm and collected demeanor a stark contrast to their unraveling. This was the moment we had waited for, the psychological payoff of months of planning. Every smirk, every sneer, every attempt they had made to intimidate me was now useless. The mistress tried again, desperate now. You can't take everything. He deserves it." I met her gaze evenly. He deserves what? The arrogance he carried? The lies he spread? The way he thought he could control everyone? No. Justice doesn't belong to the arrogant. It belongs to those who prepare, those who plan, those who think ahead. Her lips parted, words failing her. She had been confident in her influence, in her ability to manipulate both him and the outcome. But she had underestimated me. Underestimated patience, intelligence, and careful planning. The lawyer, noticing her faltering, spoke up with calm authority. "Ma'am, your role in this doesn't change the law. Your assumptions about ownership and control are irrelevant. Every claim has been legally secured by the client." Her smirk vanished entirely. The arrogance she had worn like armor disintegrated into shock. Her eyes, which had once glittered with self-assured triumph, now reflected confusion, disbelief, and a hint of fear. Husband, now realizing the full scope of his miscalculation, glanced at her as if searching for reassurance, but she offered none. Her confidence was gone, leaving him utterly exposed. "You've played your games," she whispered finally, voice barely audible. "But I never thought—" I interrupted softly, almost tenderly. "You never thought patience, intelligence, and preparation could defeat arrogance and deceit. That's the difference between us." Her shoulders slumped. Every manipulation, every whisper of influence, every attempt to intimidate or charm, it had failed. The mistress, who had once been untouchable in her own mind, was powerless. I turned my attention back to my husband, who now sat defeated, realizing he had lost not only his assets but also the loyalty and influence of the person he thought would secure his victory. His nightmare had deepened. The divorce he had expected to celebrate as his triumph was now a theater of his complete downfall. I exhaled slowly, feeling a calm, deep satisfaction. The storm was far from over, But the first wave had completely engulfed those who had underestimated me. The mistress' downfall was both symbolic and practical. It marked the total collapse of their combined arrogance. And as the courtroom, or our private battlefield, settled into a tense silence, I knew one thing: the nightmare had only just begun. The room had quieted to a tense stillness, but inside me, a storm of memories and emotions raged. I could feel the weight of years pressing down. The manipulation, the lies, the constant feeling of being underestimated and controlled. For so long I had been silenced, forced to endure a partner who believed arrogance and intimidation could define a marriage. Now sitting across from him, seeing him unravel, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and reflection. This wasn't just about winning a divorce. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my power. I remembered the first time I realized just how calculated he was. The whispered threats, the subtle digs, the way he made me doubt myself at every turn. It had been exhausting, almost crushing. There were nights I cried silently, wondering if I could ever outmaneuver someone so cunning. But I learned. I watched, I planned, and I prepared. I became patient, not in weakness, but in quiet strength. Every legal move I made, every hidden account I protected, every document I prepared, it was a shield forged in fire, a silent weapon that would one day turn his confidence into panic. I glanced at him now. His face was pale, a mix of disbelief and fear. Every overconfident word he had spoken earlier had come back to haunt him. And yet, beneath that fear, I could see regret. The first glimmers of realization that his arrogance had blinded him. The mistress sat silently, powerless, her smirk completely gone. Her eyes flickered nervously, and I knew she was replaying every moment, every assumption, every tiny victory she had imagined, and seeing how empty it had been. I took a slow, steady breath, feeling the calm wash over me. "You thought you could break me," I whispered softly to myself, more for reflection than anyone else. "You thought arrogance and deceit would be enough." But I learned to endure. I learned to fight silently. I waited for the right moment. And now, the courtroom, or the office that had become our battlefield, felt like it was holding its breath. Every detail, every subtle maneuver, every piece of preparation was coming to fruition. Months of struggle, sleepless nights, and quiet calculation had led to this precise moment of triumph. I allowed myself a brief smile. It wasn't vindictive or cruel. It was the quiet satisfaction of someone who had endured, who had grown stronger under pressure, and who was finally witnessing justice unfold. "It's over," I said softly, my voice calm but resolute. Not because of anger or revenge, but because of patience, preparation, and intelligence. That's what wins in the end. Husband's expression hardened, but it was hollow. His nightmare wasn't just the loss of assets. It was the realization that he had misjudged me entirely. Every manipulation, every attempt to intimidate, every smug prediction had been a trap. The mistress finally whispered something under her breath, disbelief lacing her voice. I never saw it coming." And that was the emotional climax. The moment where the arrogance of years of manipulation shattered, replaced with regret, fear, and helplessness. Where I stood, calm and victorious, having endured every challenge and emerged not just legally victorious, but emotionally stronger than ever. In that silence, I realized something profound. Triumph is sweetest not when it's loud or vengeful, but when it's quiet, inevitable, and the result of strategy, patience, and unwavering self-belief. The moment had arrived. After months of careful planning, sleepless nights, and meticulous preparation, the culmination of every strategy, every hidden move, every ounce of patience was finally visible before me. The room, once charged with tension, arrogance, and anticipation, now felt heavy with inevitability. Husband sat slumped, shoulders rounded, his face pale and drawn. For the first time, he was truly defeated. Not just legally, but psychologically. Every plan he had ever counted on, every asset he believed he could claim, every manipulation he thought would work, none of it mattered. His empire of arrogance had crumbled into dust, leaving him exposed, powerless and humiliated. The mistress, still perched behind him, had gone completely silent. Her once dominant smirk was gone, replaced with disbelief and fear. She realized fully now that her influence was gone. She had underestimated me, underestimated my resolve, underestimated the quiet strength that had been building under the surface all along. My lawyer gave me a subtle nod. That single gesture told me everything. The final pieces had fallen into place. "All claims have been reviewed," he said, voice steady, authoritative. "All legal protections are in place. The client retains full control of all assets and properties. There are no loopholes left for exploitation." Husband's hands trembled as he realized the finality of the words. I don't understand," he stammered, voice barely above a whisper. His entire confidence, once so unshakable, had evaporated. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, measured, and precise. "You thought today was your best day. You thought your arrogance, your manipulation, your threats would be enough. But none of it worked. And now the reality is clear. The victory you imagined is gone." The courtroom, or our battlefield, held a collective silence. The sheer shock on their faces, the disbelief, the unraveling of years of control. It was complete. Every move I had made, every secret account I had protected, every legal maneuver I had executed, had led to this final, undeniable triumph. Husband tried one last desperate attempt to regain authority, slamming his hands on the table. "This isn't over! You can't—" I cut him off with a soft but firm statement. "It is over. You underestimated me, and arrogance doesn't win. Preparation, patience, and intelligence do." Even the judge, observing the unfolding drama, nodded subtly. The evidence, the legal strategy, and the undeniable control I had maintained were too solid to dispute. The mistress whispered in disbelief, almost a murmur. I never thought it could end like this." I allowed myself a small smile, not cruel, but victorious. Months of endurance, meticulous planning, and quiet strategy had finally paid off. I had not only defended myself, but turned the entire divorce into a triumph that was legal, psychological, and emotional. Husband's face was a portrait of horror, realizing that everything he had counted on, the wealth, the power, the control, was gone. The divorce he had anticipated celebrating, as his ultimate victory, had become a nightmare that he could not escape. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me. The tension, the planning, the fear, and the anticipation, all of it culminated in a quiet, absolute victory. The mistress had lost her influence. My husband had lost control, and I had won, not just legally, but completely. He thought today was his best day, I whispered to myself, letting the words sink in, but it was mine. The courtroom remained silent, except for the subtle rustle of papers. I knew that the nightmare for him was only beginning, not because of vengeance, but because every move, every plan, every arrogant act he had made had already backfired spectacularly. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened, free, and powerful. Victory was not just a word. It was the culmination of endurance, intelligence, and patience. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Sometimes the greatest triumphs are silent, methodical, and inevitable. The first few weeks after the divorce were quiet, almost surreal. The storm of legal battles, psychological warfare, and tense confrontations had passed, leaving behind a calm that felt unfamiliar but liberating. The apartment, once filled with tension and whispered manipulations, now felt like my sanctuary. Every corner, every object, was a reminder that this space, this life, belonged entirely to me. I spent my mornings sipping coffee by the window, watching the city wake up, feeling a sense of ownership over every aspect of my life that I had fought so hard to protect. The freedom was intoxicating. No longer did I have to anticipate threats, temper my words, or carefully monitor every move. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into projects I had postponed for years, exploring opportunities that my husband's control had once limited. My career flourished, fueled by the focus and determination that had sustained me through the divorce. Every promotion, every new achievement, every compliment felt like validation, not just of skill, but of resilience, patience, and intelligence. Social life, too, took on a new meaning. Friends who had once watched me endure silently now saw a version of me that was confident, unapologetic, and thriving. The gatherings, dinners, and casual coffee dates were no longer a reminder of someone else's dominance. They were a celebration of my autonomy, financial independence, which I had painstakingly secured during the months of preparation, allowed me to explore life without restriction. Trips I had postponed, classes I had wanted to take, experiences I had dreamed of. Everything was now within reach. I realized that the divorce, which had once seemed like a battlefield, had become a gateway to freedom. Husband's presence faded gradually from my life. He tried to contact me once or twice, but his messages were empty, desperate and tinged with regret. I did not respond. The nightmare he had lived through was his own consequence. There was no need for my interference. Mistress, too, had disappeared from the picture. Her arrogance had been dismantled, her influence nullified. She had underestimated not just me, but patience, strategy, and quiet power. Watching from afar, I could see that the lesson had been learned, harshly and irrevocably. As the weeks turned into months, I felt a profound sense of empowerment. I was no longer defined by fear, intimidation, or manipulation. I had reclaimed every part of my life that had once been controlled by someone else. The victory was not only legal, it was emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. One evening, sitting by the window as the sun dipped below the skyline, I reflected on everything I had endured and achieved. The journey had been grueling, but it had forged strength, clarity, and resilience. I survived, I whispered to myself, a quiet affirmation. I endured. I prepared. I won, and now I live. The divorce that had begun as a threat, a nightmare, and a test of endurance had transformed into a story of liberation. Every lesson, every plan, every patient maneuver had brought me here, to a life that was fully mine, where confidence was not just a shield, but a way of being. For the first time in years, I smiled without reservation, fully aware that the best days were not behind me. They were unfolding now, one deliberate, empowered moment at a time. The courtroom was empty now, the papers filed, the decisions made. The storm that had raged for months had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm that was almost sacred. I stood alone for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me. It was a silence full of triumph, resilience, and reflection. I thought back to the day it had all started, the day he had walked in, dripping with arrogance, declaring, "Today's my best day. I'm taking everything from you." At the time, the words had felt like a blade poised above my life. I had felt fear, yes, but more than that, I had felt determination. Every plan I had laid, every strategy I had implemented, every patient move, it had been worth it. And now the tables had turned completely. The man who had thought himself untouchable was defeated. His arrogance, his threats, his manipulations, all of it had been undone by patience, intelligence, and preparation. I reflected on the lessons learned through this ordeal. Life is not about reacting in panic, nor is it about letting fear dictate your choices. True strength comes from preparation, from patience, and from knowing your own power, even when others try to diminish it. The mistress, once so confident, had disappeared from the narrative entirely. She had underestimated me, and the consequences were hers to bear. Watching her fade from relevance was a reminder that arrogance can only carry you so far when you are up against someone who has the foresight to protect themselves. And my husband, he had finally understood that control and dominance are illusions when they are built on arrogance. His nightmare had been carefully orchestrated, not out of cruelty, but out of justice and careful preparation. I exhaled slowly, feeling a deep sense of liberation. The divorce had been more than a legal battle. It had been a reclaiming of identity, power, and self-respect. I had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully in control of my own life. He thought today was his best day, I whispered quietly, almost to myself. But it was mine. The words echoed in my mind, carrying with them not just victory but closure. No bitterness lingered, only the quiet pride of someone who had endured, strategized, and ultimately triumphed. As I walked out of the courtroom and into the sunlight, I felt the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. The path ahead was open, full of opportunity, and entirely mine to navigate. No one could dictate my life anymore. Not him, not her, not circumstance. And in that moment, I realized the ultimate truth. Life's victories are sweetest when they are hard-earned, silent, and inevitable. They belong not to those who demand control, but to those who prepare, endure, and act with intelligence and patience. I smiled, fully at peace, knowing that the nightmare had ended for me, but had become a lesson, a reflection, and a cautionary tale for those who had underestimated me. The best days were not behind me. They were unfolding now, deliberate, empowered, and entirely mine.